Like, do you even know who you are? I am black, biggity black, American, yes, but bigger than that. Spitting opinions, rooted in facts. Hope you aware the culture is bigger than plats. Used to be a summit, now we got a...
Welcome, everybody. I'm really looking forward to talking about hip-hop's influence on Asian culture. I didn't intentionally wear a Wu-Tang Clan shirt, I promise. So we have a lot impacted in store today. But first, I want to introduce our panelists. So we have Ashlee Griffin and Ashlee Mitchell. All right, Ashlee and Ashlee. All right, so first, I'll go ahead and do a bit of a bio on Ashlee Griffin, and then we'll go from there. Then we'll kind of jump it off with some questions, and then we'll have some time for dialogue, and then a bit of Q&A at the end. Sound good? All right. So Ashlee Griffin, better known as multifaceted ACG, is a diverse content creator. She specializes in Hallyu Wave entertainment with an emphasis on K-pop and music production commentary. She's collaborated on projects and events both domestically and in South Korean-based companies and with South Korean-based brands. And also, you guys should really check out our podcast, Multifaceted ACG Presents an Album a Day, found wherever you get podcasts. So welcome, Ashlee.
Hey, y'all. Thank you.
Awesome. And next we have Ashlee Mitchell. Ashlee Mitchell is a Gen Z writer with a focus on Black and Korean pop culture. Her work can be found in publications like, I don't know, Teen Vogue, Grammys, MTV News, and Dazed. She's also a really committed and busy communication student at Northwestern University with a concentration in African American studies. Welcome, Ashlee.
Hello.
All right. So again, today we're just going to talk about some of the key intersections on hip hop, or between hip hop and K-pop, right? Or Asian music more largely. But, we'll go into questions like, is Asian music generated and inspired by Black music, whether it be from a perspective of appropriation or appreciation, right? But before we dive into the meat of it, let's just roughly start. What's the difference, right? We hear a lot of conversation about appropriation versus appreciation. How do you guys define either or, and where do you see it fitting with respect to K-pop or Asian music?
Really, I feel like it really depends on, like some things are obvious, like when someone is wearing braids during a hip hop concept, or dreads, or just doing anything that's like stereotypically like Black or from some other culture, then it's pretty obvious. But sometimes I think when it's just like the genre of music, maybe like it's R&B and hip hop, and they're not necessarily dressing like another person's culture, then I think that's more appreciation than appropriation.
I go a little bit more textbook about it. First and foremost, saying appropriation, that really wasn't the book term for it. It was misappropriation, but we've made a new nomenclature of it, if you will, over the years. So basically, if I'm appreciating something, I'm making an effort to understand it, and I'm acknowledging where it came from. I'm not denying it in any shape, form, or fashion. Misappropriation or appropriation is embezzlement. You are taking and implying or flat out saying that it's yours and yours alone. And even though we're talking about it in music, you can see it rampant on TikTok these days with the kids hitting the ice in my veins, not knowing that comes from Black New York basketball culture and whatnot. So it's everywhere. It's flat out embezzlement. That's what it really is.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting how you bring about how it sort of segues and is so ubiquitous within and across social media, right? I think that'll be something, and everybody in the comments, I keep commenting, I see a lot of good stuff coming through, but let's touch on that at the end, right? But I think now that we have a nice foundation, right, in terms of appropriation versus appreciation, how do we see it most widely in hip hop culture or just Black culture generally, right? Let's just broaden it a bit with respect to Asian music, culture, or K-pop specifically.
You said broaden it?
Yeah, so in terms of hip hop, but, just Black culture generally, right? Because I think the two are so intertwined, you can't divorce one from the next. So what do you say, Ashlee?
I feel like a lot of Korean artists have been very open about where they get inspiration. I feel like a lot of them reference Black artists as their inspiration, especially like early on in their careers. But I think the problem is that when Black people or Black fans bring up that certain things they do are disrespectful or that people find offense to it, they don't necessarily take that into account or care. So I feel like it's like, how do you say you're inspired by this person, but when this person's group of people is calling you out or saying this makes me uncomfortable, this feels disrespectful, you're ignoring it or saying you don't care. Like it's kind of problematic.
One big factor that makes it very touchy-feely, these newer generations of artists have no qualms. These are the ones who have grown up with the internet connected to them at all times and the accessibility of grabbing YouTube and whatnot and watching things there. Black music or American music came to Korea during wartime. So the appeal of saying you're listening to foreign music is one thing, but admitting that you're taking it from them because they believe in emulating if it's something good, saying where it came from is going to minimize their impact. So the younger artists, zero qualms about saying anything. It's the labels that will not say where they're sourcing the material. And everything is influenced by Black entertainment anyway. So it's very hard to differentiate the two if what you see as the apex of entertainment already has us hidden behind it. You have no knowledge of it always being us. So it's really, it's a little funky, if you will.
Yeah, it gets really murky. Ashlee, what's your take?
Definitely. I think that's what I like about, I think there are some outliers. Like that's what I like about Big Hit, about BTS's company, is they've been very clear that we're making Black music. Like they're not trying to hide it. They're not calling it anything else but Black music. But then I feel like at other times, it's more like they kind of like whitewash it. They just call it Western American when really they mean Black. You know, it's like it's not Western, it's not American, it's specifically Black. And even in our, in our pop music, there's people, like there's Dua Lipa's, there's Ariana Grande's, there's people that are using Black culture and becoming super megastars, while the Black artists doing it are pigeonholed in the categories and they don't reach pop music status. So I just feel like it's a larger issue. It's just a big issue of like anti-Blackness globally.
If they did put on it that they were flat out doing Black music like YG Entertainment used to put on their albums back in the day, that's jolting. It's really jolting.
And I mean, how then do we find, or like what will be, I would say, that point of reconciliation, right? What's going to be that breakthrough to, where we can really find, like, as Black people, right? But again, as Black music or Black art, right? What's going to be the distinction between like inspiring versus, let's say, kind of getting credit for that, right? What is it going to take for Black artists to get credit, right? Who's the onus on, and where do we start?
I think it starts with the labels. Like the people, they're pushing the young white artists doing Black music. That's who they're supporting and putting their money behind promoting. They need to put that same energy on the Black artists that are doing that music. If Black artists are given those same opportunities and given the same attention, then I think they could be just as big as any of the white artists.
Definitely has a lot of the weight on the back of the entertainment labels. You have to be willing to publicize where those inspirations come from and elevate them. There was a moment years ago at KCON, this massive convention that is focused on Hallyu entertainment. When it started in 2012, it was not what it is now. But there was a point in time where they brought Quincy Jones out and celebrated and gave that man his flowers while he is still here. Those little moments of acknowledgement for other consumers who have no idea the impact and the influence and the longevity of Black music and Black entertainment legacy, that was a massive moment. A predominantly Korean hosted event, both Korean American and Koreans abroad, who put that man front and center before a performance ever hit the stage. Moments like that are palpable and hard to forget. But if you keep hiding behind the protective veil of, we found it on the internet, no one will know, people do know. Right. So it has to come from them first. And then the artists have the freedom to mimic that behavior, and it's honored.
You're now segueing to the point of visibility, right? Because again, yet another thing that's so inherently connected to it all. How can Black culture, although it's already really visible, right, and kind of is ubiquitous in its own way, but how can it become more ubiquitous, right, in and across Asian culture within Asian music, or K-pop music specifically, however you want to approach it?
I think comes down to their society and the way that they view Black people in general. I feel like there's a lack of tolerance, obviously, for people of darker complexions, even in their own culture, and then that extends to the anti-Blackness that's been going on for years and years. Like they still do blackface on TV shows there and see no problem with it. So like there's just deep-rooted anti-Blackness that's unchecked in their society. So it's obvious that would extend to entertainment as well. Like they feel like they can take pieces that they enjoy and they don't necessarily think of it as dehumanizing, or they don't care to check themselves for that behavior. So I feel like there really just needs to be a shift in like more education and more emphasis put on like, hey, if you're entering the global, scene, you have to be respectful of other people who look different from you or don't necessarily fit your beauty standards or your standards of how humans should exist. Like Black people are a different culture. And if you're going to be engaging with Black culture and using Black culture for your country, then you need to be respectful of Black people.
An area that's going to be a difficulty for all of us to get over as Westerners, especially U.S. Westerners, we believe in the power of the individual, and we want the individual shine. We want the individual accolades. Whereas Republic of Korea, the focus is how the whole comes together, the continuity of that. So when you do have these minority producers, because it's not just Black producers and it's not new. I mean, Teddy Riley was doing this years ago and had a group of his own that was successful in Korean music. But when you are used to not even doing so much as acknowledging who produced the song or who assisted with creating the costumes and things that these young men and women are wearing in their videos and whatnot, because it's far more important to say SM did this or JYP did this, it's going to be very hard to campaign for individual expression, because that could be misinterpreted by them as our strength came from this one person that we were inspired by.
Right.
So culturally, that's something that the younger generations are making a huge shift on. And when I say younger, I'm not talking about high school, middle school age. South Koreans couldn't even leave the country for leisure purposes until about 35, 36 years ago.
Yeah.
So being able to have the freedom, I'm going to say 40 and under, being able to have the freedom to get your hands on more of what's going on in the rest of the world and whatnot, and not playing into that hermit kingdom experience, it's going to take some massive shifts. And I agree with Ashlee. Big Hit is going to be a front runner in that, coming from under the wings of JYP Entertainment, who never has held back on the fact that they're influenced by and inspired by how business is doing here in the United States. They're going to be one heck of a front runner in this and making this shift happen.
Yeah. And I want to take it back, right? I want to get into some historical context, right? Where we even begin to see the emergence, right? Where the start of the impetus of Black culture in Asian music. But before we go there, let's just get kind of a landscape and some color on who are the big hitters, like who are the big production companies in K-pop music, right? I know them, you two know them, but for people that this may be their first interaction, right, and kind of looking at the intersection of hip-hop and K-pop, lay out the landscape for us.
The big three.
The three.
And then that's SM, YG,
Okay.
SM, YG, and JYP, and then there's Big Hit, who just started from the bottom, out of nowhere, take over everybody with one group. One single
we hear that that's the big three, but that's not the big three. Men lie, women lie, numbers don't. Jay-Z told us that. The big one is CJ Entertainment, the ones who hold down K-Con. They hold the distribution of everybody's music. Then SM, and now Big Hit is pushing JYP out of the way. So yeah.
Context is key. Thank you for that Jay-Z reference also. I see you did that. But now onto historical context, right? Where do we even begin to see the emergence of Black culture in K-pop, in Asian music?
From the absolute beginning.
Okay.
The first K-pop group they had. What
year around?
You know a year, Ashlee?
I do it. I hate it. My brain is like, the historian about to surface up. The bigger group that we usually peg as the first for the whole scene would be Sotaji and Boys. And they made their debut in 1991. But there was a group right before that, if you watch the special on YouTube about the evolution of K-pop, there was another group that had no qualms about admitting, yeah, we grabbed all of this from the VHSs we were watching that got moved over here during wartime. But you'd want to put it at, I'd say, 88 to about 1991, when the baggy clothes and using the N-word in songs because they didn't know. Like, that's where it started. Which is SM Entertainment at the time. So Taji was in that realm at the time.
Yeah.
And in segueing, right, or continuing with that, like how has Black presence, right, or influence changed, or has it changed, right? How Asian consumers or just K-pop consumers view Black people or Blackness generally, right? Is there a point at which we see that our influence either helps amplify, right, a Black message or kind of a Black agenda, or just kind of understanding and seeing us for who we are and what we contribute to culture globally?
I think it makes them think we're cool, but I don't think they think outside of that, to be honest. I don't think it makes them think anything more. I don't really think they think about it, to be honest, about the history, culture, oppression. I don't think they care, to be honest.
Don't care because they don't have the interest in knowing that if you have the experience of ever being in an Asian country for longer than just what our visa allows, like really living there, it's of no interest. I know that I know it's of zero interest. They have no idea, and it's such a no-brainer to us as minorities here because we're inundated with backslaps on a regular basis of how we're supposed to minimize and make ourselves invisible. They're focused on passing the exam to get into school, passing the interview to get a job. It's of no interest, but we are cool. I mean, we are cool. Right. That's our drip, but we are just the factor of cool.
Yeah. And cashing in on that cool capital, right? Because I mean, I find that largely, right, in an Asian context, in a K-pop context, and just cool and cultural capital, right? Let's get into it because, so much of what and how we influence culture is, we see it, like we love the idea, we love the cornrows, we love the braids, we love the aesthetic, right? And then we can then kind of bring it and manipulate it or warp it into whatever will be an editorial, right? That you may see on a Vogue, that you may see on a Dazed or wherever, right? But how then do we begin to take onus, right? And kind of to take ownership of that as Black people? I know it may not be our job, and it is kind of unfair, right? For us to have to do more work to kind of claim what we've done and to just ask to be seen, right, as what we actually give and who we are. But what's the work that comes from our perspective or our stance?
Honestly, I feel like it's just, they're coming from a country that's homogenous where everybody looks the same and racism just isn't a thing there. So I feel like it's just like you're asking someone who is around people that look just like them all the time to think in the context that you're thinking in and that we're thinking in. And I don't think they would get the experience unless they actually go to America or unless they actually go to another country and experience being a minority. Because I feel like it's easier to get other Asian Americans to understand and to care about our issues and to kind of sympathize with that. But I think people that are in Asia, like living in Asia, they have their whole different set of problems and issues in their society, but that usually doesn't have to do with race. It might have to do with maybe colorism, maybe classism, things like that, but racism, not really.
Not in the same ways we experience it, that's for certain. Accessibility, there was a moment, and this is genuinely adjacent to this, but there was a moment in 2020 where this man was sharing his Google Drive of all these phenomenal research journals and PDFs of books and whatnot about Blackness, just in general. And because he made it freely accessible and we could donate to support the cause, it got taken down. A lot of the publishing houses and whatnot took it away. Minimizing our voice, depleting accessibility is what leads to issues that by the time someone asks you about it, you're prickly in your response. And we want to tell people all the time, just look it up. I found it on the internet. It's not, I am guilty of that because I just don't understand how people don't find things on the internet. But I don't also want to be the mouthpiece for my entire ethnic background or my culture for that matter. So making the information more accessible, being more honest about where it comes from, the more that's promoted, the better off we'll all be in the end, because there cannot be any space for denying the histrionics of what's going on.
Ashlee, you had a rare opportunity to interview BTS. I mean, that's not a small thing, you know. That's like, yeah, I just talked to Beyonce, you know, just like very casual. Tell us about that, right? What was that process like? Tell us the story leading up to it, and you know what you were able to see right outside of the image of BTS and speaking to them directly.
Okay, so I actually had already interviewed TXT and Hypen for the Grammys, and so the Grammy editor, he knows who I am. He had randomly messaged me sometime in December. He's like, I might have something BTS related coming up, and I'm like, would you be interested? And I'm like, sure. Like, I don't know what that means. But then later in like March, he's like, okay, I have an opportunity to do a feature with BTS for the Grammys. They want to do this feature for the Grammys. Do you want to take it? And they're like, I'm like, well, yeah, of course, I'll take it. So he gave it to me, and honestly, I don't think their interviews are very, very, very professional.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really I wouldn't say they're any different than the way you would see them in another interview. I think they're pretty much the way you see it is the way you get it. They're not.
Mm-hmm.
I've interviewed a lot of Korean artists at this point, so I don't really get surprised or shocked by anything. I just really think it's really. I mean, they're all just people. Like they act normal. It's not like anything crazy or like weird. It's not even anything like necessarily memorable. Just like we just talk about the music, and that's pretty much it. You ask the questions, they give you. You have to send them the questions, and they have to approve the question. They took out a couple that I wanted to ask them. I actually wanted to ask about what American artists they like. They didn't want to talk about that. They don't want any of that brought up. They only want to focus on artists from their company, on them. They didn't want me to ask them about English either. I asked about, would you guys prefer to win an award for something you sung in your native language, like Korean? They didn't want to talk about language.
Mm-hmm.
So no language, no American artists, no, and like, yeah, that's how it is with all the companies. But yeah, they're pretty strict on what you can ask them, and yeah.
Would have been able to ask what you wanted. You would have been one of the few of us who have ever done so, and then it would have been more memorable versus it being work. Because you're 100% correct. They regulate everything that we want to ask. But we all know the answers to all these interview questions. Those who have written and those who read the writing, we know. So that's awesome. That's awesome nonetheless.
But I did push about, I know they've never been asked what award they wanted to win a Grammy for, like what from their discography they were able to win a Grammy for. So I wanted to ask that. I wanted to ask them about being East Asians in the American music industry, and I was able to ask that. So I'm glad that they were at least open to some of it. Not all of it, but some of it they were willing to talk about. So, yeah.
Wow. And stylistically, right? I mean, I think it's impossible to talk music without the fashion of it all. You know, I find, and, you know, and having lived and spent a couple of years in my life in China and Beijing and Japan, et cetera, like I just see such compelling and provocative style, right? But I also see a lot of styles that originated from Black people, you know, and most, you know, I mean, just call it what it is, right? Let's call it spade a spade. But what do you guys think in terms of like the styling, right? It's something that's a lot more innocuous, right? It's just how we look, right? You know, it's just what we're wearing, it's just what we're putting on. But at the end of the day, it's not at all, right? So how do you guys reconcile like the styling aspect or kind of how artists are dressed or how they get ready versus, you know, the music and product that they're putting out?
Hard one for me in two spaces. One, because we're at this point right now, everyone's emulating the 90s. So you've got grunge influence, you've got monochromatic juxtaposed with polka dots, wild stuff that we experienced in the 90s. So a part of it comes along with, are you doing justice to the generation you're reflecting? Because it's my generation. And then the other side of it is being in those shoes. When I was in South Korea, one of the things they do very early on, if you do a tour or anything, they want to put you in a hanbok. And I have spoken ad nauseum about the importance of respecting cultural attire.
Mm-hmm.
Me as an American, you could not ask me what our attire besides denim, and we don't have something that ties into America, you know. And I put on the hanbok, and it's a bow that's supposed to be tied appropriately across the chest, and I'm very top heavy, which is not common over there at all, not without purchase. And as a woman who had to be in her 60s or 70s, she had tears in her eyes while she was walking up to me just out of random and helped me tie it. And she was saying in Korean, like, "You look so beautiful in my clothes. Thank you for respecting my clothes." I'll never forget that for as long as I live, because it was going against what I get online and argue about all the time. If there's an appropriate acknowledgement of where it came from and why you're in it. I wasn't in it to do anything ridiculous. It was photos that I had to take. But if you're just out here claiming it that it's the hip hop style, you know, when you have your hat backward and whatnot, that ain't hip hop. Like, don't do that.
Right.
So it's a very thin line between how it goes with fashion. Now, hair, that's a different one. But with the fashion, their hair is the same texture as ours. So it's really hard for me to tell you not to wear your hair curly like mine is right now when we got the same texture and you got the same problems. But when you box braid your hair and you want to say that that's hip hop style, that's where someone needs to come in and be very adamant about you getting the education on that and accepting that it's not something you need to be doing.
You know, I think Meredith Clark in the comments has a really great question. This is for either of you to take. Do you have a take on BTS's past wild amount of appropriation of Black hair and how they've changed after feedback? I know they specifically were supposed to be a hip-hop group before rebranding.
I think they're probably the best example from the K-pop industry of how you can make up for past mistakes or do better. Now, they're not perfect, and I think that's a big part of their brand is that they're relatable, they're imperfect. When they make mistakes, they at least acknowledge them. I think with most artists, especially like SM artists, when you get called out for appropriation or something, they just ignore it. They don't do anything about it, and they keep doing it over and over again. But at least with BTS, they've acknowledged that we hear you, and they've lessened it. They've lessened a lot of it, and they've shown that they at least care about what the fans have to say. So I think they're obviously not perfect. There have been a couple incidents where it's like, okay, maybe you shouldn't have done that, but it's not a clear disrespect. There's an effort being made, I would say, to respect people.
They are one of the few instances of shifting, just like Ashlee said. Mamamoo is a good example of that as well. There were some blatant issues, and they stepped off the scene for a moment to fix them. Block B, Zico, that was a real, genuinely personal issue for me because I had the chance to tell that man to his face, stop. And the dismissiveness of it was startling.
To his face.
Oh, yes. I was on a set of one of the shows while they were filming in LA. So I know he understood. I speak Korean and English. So I know he understood what was being explained. But he eventually did come around and make that choice on his own, I gather. But I'm proud of when people do have an incident of any sort and take responsibility for it and do what needs to be done. So BTS, I give them pats on the back for that.
Yeah. And so as we transition, right, from just understanding the groups and kind of how the major industry players, who they are, what they do, segueing it a bit into activism, right? What are instances, or have we seen any instances of groups like BTS or larger K-pop groups, you know, beyond acknowledgement, but directly speaking to and kind of speaking up for, right, stepping out, kind of coming to the fore for issues like Black Lives Matter?
There's been a lot. One of the really good articles you can find on this website called bandwagon.asia, they kept a list after George Floyd's, after that, because that's still a raw space for me. They kept a list of who made acknowledgments: BTS, Monsta X, Rich Brian, for crying out loud, Kehlani, just anyone who was of any influence in Asian entertainment, keeping a running tab of their tweets or anything that they made mention of. There's some effort being made, and it's all coming from these younger generations, people who are 33 and younger, who are like, no, this is crap. I'm saying something about it. So yeah, there have been some big moments in that, and big donations too.
Mhm. And beyond that, right?
Yeah.
What do we see in terms of kind of the initial recognition to, you know, what is a longer term or sustained effort, right? Because in kind of connecting the American side of that, right? Around this time last year would be a couple more days that George Floyd happened. You know, this time last year, there were a lot of black squares. You know, what the hell is a black square? You know, there were a lot of donations. Where is this money going? You know, but it was kind of an in and out, one and done effort. What have we seen, or have there been instances of these K-pop groups that have acknowledged this, you know, kind of sustain that effort, right? Whether it be something as simple as acknowledging, you know, how they take and feed from black culture, or in other ways. How have we seen this? Is this a factor?
Last fashion sometimes. I saw recently a photo of an artist who was in a group, and on his sleeve he had a patch that said Black Lives Matter, and it touches my heart so much because they are artists. They are a product of the entertainment company that cuts their check if they cut it on time. And just being able to see that I might not be able to verbally say what it is that I want to say. They're using fashion in a way of protest and solidarity. So that's something that I've noticed.
From artists wearing things to support Black Lives Matter.
Ashlee has disappeared.
It looks like she'll come back. But Ashlee, while we have you here, let's give the audience a bit of background on that experience, right? We have the conversation set and framed through a lens of K-pop and Black influence on K-pop and Asian music, but talk a bit about the lived experience, right? What's it like, or what have your experiences been being in Korea, and how is it different from what we are typically told, or, you know, what we typically see?
One of the things we most definitely hear, especially from other minorities, the first thing they want to ask, well, two things. You weren't scared to go? And then the second thing is, do they like us? Don't nobody like us, baby. Just accept it. It is what it is. But being there as a person who I went there for professional purposes, but also I am a fangirl, an undeniable one. So trying to meet in the middle with the young and see if that's an interest. It's far more of an interest for us who are receiving it as an export than it is for them. That's not to say they don't go to the concerts and things of that sort, but they're dealing with massive shifts in the way life has always been there. You have more people risking it all to step up and talk about their sexuality, their gender identity. You're having more moments of women and young men saying, I am never getting married. If this is the system that it creates, I want no parts to do with it. There's these massive uprisings that are happening where they want Western input, but they don't want Westerners to change it for them. They want to do it on their own. So while they're going through these experiences and things, anyone who dresses like we do or listens to Western music or things of that sort, they're not ostracized, but they're most certainly different. You know what everyone is wearing there during the wintertime, black, khaki, and white. And you know what everyone's wearing during the spring. That one mind, that one cohesive experience infiltrates everything. So they allow themselves to express as much as they can through their music, which is another reason why the YouTube special, if you have YouTube Red or wait till it's all free, hearing the artists who have been in the game a little bit longer talk about the things that they're disappointed with the entertainment industry and what they would like to see change. That's an impact, that's an influence of globalization. So it was a very humbling experience. I learned quite a bit that I thought I knew, and I learned even more that I had no idea about.
Post-pandemic, would you go back?
I'm trying my best to be back there by November of next year, permanently. Yeah, I'm trying my best. I found my second home there. I really did.
Wow. No, it's interesting you say that. I feel similarly about China, right? I'm from Chicago, currently in New York, but
right.
Those are my people, right? Like all the complexities, right? We have our own complex issues. They have their own, but like those are my brothers, right? My brothers and sisters going, as you call them.
Absolutely.
Ashlee Mitchell, I just asked Ashlee, you know, kind of what was her experience like, right? And kind of first being in Korea and kind of getting involved like firsthand. But let's change it a bit. What was your first interest, right? When did you first know or have that first inkling that, like, I really just love this K-pop stuff, right? I love Asian culture. Or where did it start for you and how?
It was really only BTS that I liked. I got into it in high school. My friend showed me a video, and it's actually when they were on the American Music Awards. They were the first K-pop group to be on an American TV show like that. So I saw them there, and I got interested in them. And then when I got to college, I went to their Love Yourself concert in late 2018 in Chicago, and then I got more interested. And then I ended up going to Korea to study abroad in late 2019. And yeah. All right. And then when I was in Korea, I kind of got into other groups besides BTS a bit, but it's always mostly been BTS for me because like I got disillusioned, I guess, with the appropriation and things like that from a lot of the other groups that I wasn't seeing with BTS, and it kind of changed my view of it. Yeah. So, but yeah, I just think it was mostly been music, and then it kind of went into K-dramas. But yeah. I think I like that I could recognize parts of my own culture in it.
What part?
Respectful.
What part?
The hip hop music, the fashion. Like, I feel like when I thought of Korean music before getting into K-pop, I thought it would be so different from what I was used to. But then I realized it was actually quite similar because they were taking inspiration from my culture. And that's something that appealed to me when it was done respectfully. So, yeah, I think that linkage, that familiarity is what kind of drew me in.
Yeah. And just being able to kind of see outside of ourselves. We talked about it earlier, just how individual or how much of individuals we are as Americans and American culture generally. I'm not you, I'm so much different from you, but right, to kind of go into this really foreign and unfamiliar context and see yourself there. Like, what a powerful moment. So we talked about how groups specifically have kind of come to the fore, how groups have fallen through the cracks, in terms of activism, in terms of just being and taking influence from Black culture in a lens or perspective of K-pop. Who's doing it right? What groups are doing it right? In terms of just good music, in terms of the activism, in terms of the full picture. Who's doing it best and who's doing it right?
I'm biased, but I'm going to say BTS, and I'm going to say TXT. Yeah, I think they're doing an even better job with their newer groups because now they've learned the lessons of what didn't work and what was a problem from their past, and they're kind of like, their new groups don't have any incidents of appropriation. They don't have any incidents of racism publicly that can offend people. So I feel like, and it's still like the same producing teams making the same quality music with storylines. Like, I just talked to TXT 2 nights ago over Zoom. So I just feel like it's like you're kind of getting BTS, but it's like a newer version, I guess you would say. Yeah.
Go with JYP Entertainment's Day 6. Probably comes way left field for those who might be fans of this industry. And I put a lot of that on the backs of their English-speaking artists, particularly Jay. He's one of the older members of the group, if not the oldest. And him growing up here in America and being able to see a lot of what's going on, I believe that's been a huge influence. And he also had things that he wanted to voice up and speak about during the big influx of Black Lives Matter movement initiatives. Tableau from Epic High, that's another good one. And a soloist, Eric Nam. That man is doing the work. He is all over YouTube. He's all over the news, voicing his concerns, not only about his community as an Asian American, but as a whole, and even created a podcast to create some content that's curated just for the emotional well-being we need as digital advocates now. We're all out here in advocacy for different things. So he needs a lot of love and support. He's making massive strides.
Right. The solo artists definitely have more freedom. Yeah, I was going to say also, when you said Arik Nam, that reminded me of BM from Card. He's very vocal about things. Yeah, so the artists coming from small companies that are solo artists, I feel like they have a lot more freedom to express themselves, and those are usually the ones that are, being very vocal about issues that matter.
And so we have that, but where does it go, right? Where do we go from here, right? I know both Griffin and Ashlee Mitchell, you guys have each mentioned that, it's just a lot of the onus is going to be on kind of new and up and coming groups that just bring a freshness, right? That bring kind of a novelty, that bring a level of Gen Z awareness, I call it, or just kind of that borderline millennial Gen Z awareness to it. But where to next, right? How will it evolve, in terms of becoming more oriented in kind of issues, that are so central to their makeup, right? Kind of Black issues or Black culture, right? And making those acknowledgments. Where to next?
More moments like this, incorporating more voices. Although this is an anti solidarity conference, we needed someone who was Asian representing within this conversation. This is no different than having a all male panel discuss female needs, or a all white panel discuss minority needs. So the representation and the effort has to be cross table. It can't be just within the mind. And being more congratulatory for the efforts that are made on their own to innovate and create without our influence, and congratulatory when they acknowledge it.
So in our last 15 minutes, I want to take it to the chat. The chat has been going off the entire time, and I haven't been able to get to it as much as I want to. So I'm going to start from the top. Miranda, you've had a lot of really good questions, right? But a point that Miranda made a few minutes ago, it's definitely upsetting to see the recognition of Black influence in dance as well as K-pop. How do we reconcile or just even speak to the point of dance, right? It's not something that's so easily trademarked. It's not something that's so easily stamped. What's your take?
That's a big one for me because I used to be a professional dancer. I was a ballerina and things of that sort. And I've interviewed some of these choreographers, Kyle Tootin, and I haven't interviewed Paris Gobel, but she knows who I am. It's some things are so difficult to pull away from African influence. And I'm not even talking in Africa. That's the literal pulse of so much that goes into physical expression. That's a tough one, but the choreographers, when allowed to do so, when they want to keep collecting that Korean pop entertainment bag, when allowed to do so, they do announce that they've been a part of quite a bit. Taemin works with Black choreographers, so does NCT at some points. So it's again, us with our Western expectation of independent, me, see me, hear me, versus them saying, no, the parts equal the whole. So that's going to take some time when you're trying to find a way to make dance or performance not have us within it when we're entrenched in it.
All right, and I see another question here from Meredith. We touched on this, but if anything we left out, we can come back to it. So do any of you have a take on BTS's wild amount of appropriation? We have that. And just kind of overall claim, So we touched on this one, but I don't know. I think a good way to segue or to kind of expand or extrapolate on this question is, Ashlee, what do you know about the process, right, of making these groups, right? I think process is so key and so important and kind of the DNA of what these groups will be, right? I didn't know until today that BTS was originally supposed to be a hip hop group, right?
Yeah.
What is the process, right? Kind of take us through the process and kind of how that can influence, how they ultimately turn out to be, in terms of acknowledging or unaware.
One of the large companies, SM Entertainment, created the formula of developing an idol entertainer, and that formula came from Motown. So there's no denying it. So for those who might not be familiar with the Motown sound and whatnot, Motown Records, which is now in Los Angeles, used to be 15 minutes from where I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. And some of the people who were on Motown, Diana Ross, for example, I came from the same high school as her. He would get, Berry Gordy would get young, impressionable entertainers in their early teens who just had an aptitude for music and groomed them to absolute legendary perfection, teaching them how to walk, how to dress, how to do interviews, how to perform on stage. And Lee Soo-man, the founder of SM Entertainment, took that and he created it within what would work within South Korea. That's a moment of appreciation. Mild appropriation, yes, but he doesn't hide the fact that he was influenced by how groups were developed during that time in this country. So yeah, BTS originally in 2012, 2013, they were most certainly only hip hop. You were lucky if you had any of what we're experiencing now. So for long-term fans like myself, the evolution of that has been really, really jarring.
Yeah, I could imagine. So another question that we have from Aleha, I believe it's pronounced. How do you feel about the artist Jessie? I feel like she's trying to be representative of the fact that not all Asian women behave, move, or exist in a certain way. But I also recognize that she might be seen as cool, while a Black artist might be depicted as ghetto or hood. You're taking us there, Aleha. Go ahead.
There are they. Jessie doesn't get a pass. No one ever does. However, Jessie's American. She's Korean American. She grew up in Virginia, which if you have any exposure to the Koreans there, they Black. And then she spent a lot of time in New Jersey and New York. It is hard to think of those central city areas without the influence of Latinx, LGBTQ plus, and Black people. You might think of Manhattan and Wall Street and Caucasity, but when you think of the grit, the heartbeat of these places, it's more brown than it is anything else. So she's a product of her environment. And she came over to Korea, not knowing as much Korean as she knows now and whatnot, but she came as an American woman. You will hear from the young men over there, if you ever have the opportunity to teach, they will flat out ask you, teacher, why do the women here have no body, but they do in other countries? So perhaps having that butt that she purchased and those breasts that she purchased, and she has no shame in telling that, she wants to look how she wants to look. And her rap delivery and her artistry is just a reflection of where she was reared. It's really hard to pull that away.
Ashlee, back with us?
Can you see me?
Yep, I can.
Okay. I think I've went back and forth with her. It's the same way I used to feel about Hwasa from Mamamoo. It's just like, I just feel like to some extent she's like, yeah, I understand that she's from New York. She's American. She like sees things a little differently, and she's very smart about how she does things. She never really directly appropriates anything besides like plastic surgery or whatever. It kind of reminds me kind of like a Kim Kardashian. Like she's not necessarily technically doing anything offensive, but she's very much walking the line. Yeah, very much. It's very obvious where the influence is coming from. But she's not wearing cornrows. She's not out here saying N-word, So it's kind of like, it's kind of hard to call her out, especially, and a lot of other fans like to eat it up, and they might not feel the same way about a Black artist. So I think she definitely skates away with it because she's not Black. She's able to use Black mannerisms and do Black things, and non-Black people like to consume it, and they would view it differently if it was a Black person doing the same thing.
Wow, how does it feel to be the most loved? In turn, and I want y'all to speak to it, right, as we kind of get into the last 10 minutes or so. As Black women, right, I often find that you guys are the source of so much, right? I often say that Black women, in many ways, raised America, built America, drive cultural capital, drive trends, set trends, but are the least acknowledged, right, when it comes to all of that. So Ashlee, or Ashlee G, whoever wants to take it first, how do you feel as Black women, right, in terms of your role and your just sheer influence, right, in something like K-pop and just culture generally, right? Because it starts with you, if we're honest.
I don't know. That's why I feel like I have to take a lot of breaks from K-pop. Like right now, I'm on a very big break. I haven't really been listening to K-pop. That might change when BTS releases their song tomorrow. But I just feel like you have to take breaks from this type of thing. You can't get too invested in it because I see Black fans, Black women online get attacked all the time, doxxed, disrespected, and it's like your idols are very much emulating, like Blackpink. They're very much emulating, the attitude and styling and all that, and it's like it gets a little bit irritating. It gets a little bit irritating when you see someone doing something that originates from your culture and your community, and that if your community was doing it, they wouldn't be getting the same praise, and they kind of act like this person invented something when that they didn't invent it. It's just, I guess it's like you just have to be cognizant that people are ignorant and that just not take it personally. But yeah, it's very difficult.
Had it harder to deal with when I was doing work like like Ashlee does, because you're keeping up with the information 25/8. You can't get a break from it. So you're also being bombarded with all the opinions that people who have limited experience have. But when it comes to influence, how does it feel being God's favorite? I always go back to the original Drumline movie, the part where they're all standing there and doing this, and Sean is like, "We are the heart and the soul."
Yeah,
Without the
absolutely.
percussion, without the blackness, without black women, the band doesn't move, baby. It's been proven time and time again. And without us, it's dead. So we're the drip of everything. Just it's so exciting. As frustrating as it is, it's so exciting to know that we have so much impact on so many things.
Mhm. Well, let's just let that marinate for a little bit. We the drip of everything, like absolutely. We need to get that on some shirts, Ashley. I love that.
Yes.
But in the last few minutes, let's just go ahead and kind of allow you guys to sort of shout out, your products. I know, Ashley, you work products or projects and kind of where and what you work on, Ashley. I know you have, right, period. Say it again. Say it louder. We the drip. I learned a lot today. Okay, again, the comment section going off again, per usual. But where can we find you, right? Where can we find your work, your podcasts, your articles, any other projects you have going on?
You can follow me on Twitter at itgirlash, ITGIRLASH, and on Instagram at Ashlee.LUVV. My name is spelled ASHLEE.LUVV. And my website links are in the bios of my social media. And I update it whenever I have an article, and I have a couple of things in the pipeline right now. So look forward to that. There's not a lot of Black writers covering K-pop, so I think I'm one of the very, very, very few. So definitely tune in if you're interested in Korean music in any capacity.
Yeah. And actually, how can we support you? How can everyone here support you?
Absolutely. Tell everybody.
Honestly, I guess just read my work, honestly. I mean, I do it for fun and for money right now. Like, I'm not planning on being a journalist when I graduate, but it's a way to stay involved. It's a way to kind of allow my perspective to be the perspective that's brought out. Like for instance, with the BTS interview, I don't think they would have talked about being East Asian if it was a white person that interviewed them. So, like, there's certain things that I feel like there's a perspective that I have that other people who aren't Black or aren't people of color wouldn't have. So I feel like my voice is important in this space. So yeah, just keep reading. Follow me on social media. When an article comes out, support, but nothing monetarily is necessary.
Got it. That's It Girl Ash, everybody. Can someone write it in the comments, please, so we all remember? And Ashley, what about you? How can we support you, and where can we find your work?
Woo. Well, here we go. Let me go ahead and go into my spiel that always happens. You can find me on all social media platforms under the name Multifaceted ACG. You can also find my podcast, Multifaceted ACG Presents an Album a Day, and its sister show, a 3-day sister show, on all your favorite podcast platforms. Or you can go to A3, the number, day show. .com. Also, right now at this time, most of my focus, because I'm always doing something, most of my focus right now is on this massive event that we do annually called the KPSN Podcast Fest 21. It is a 2-day event that's taking place this July, and it is an active fundraiser for the National Alliance on Mental Illness during Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. So there are over 2 guests from 5 different countries that commentate on K-dramas, Korean film, music, and the likes, as well as performances from Asian American and Korean artists in support of this fundraiser. So you can keep up with that information at K-Pop Social Night on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And my big old name is spelled MULTIFACETEDACG.
Thank you. Wow. The power in this chat, in this room, has just been palpable for the entire 58 minutes. that I've been listening, learning, and understanding where Berry Gordy fits into it and how Black women really drive this joint. So it's been great, Ashlee and Ashlee. So lovely to speak with you all. And thank you, everybody, for keeping the chat alive. This is like one of the most fire chats I've seen. So thank you guys for the energy. And it looks like Aaliyah, I'll pronounce your name right this time, Aaliyah has like dropped everybody's name, info in the chat. So before we click off and before you guys click to the left into the sessions, into the next event that we're going to that's going to happen, check it out. Follow everybody, screenshot, do what you will. And there's a recording of this. So, you know, I'm sure this will be posted somewhere and we all can keep us all updated. And thank you guys. Really, it's been fun. And
Thank you so much. Great job. Bye, y'all.
All right. Have a good one.
Like, do you even know who you are?